Welcome to the HMO Property Show by investors for investors. Brought to you by the HMO Property Co, Australia's leaders in impact investing. Investments made with the intention to generate a measurable, beneficial social or environmental impact alongside a positive financial return. Catch us weekly as we discuss all things cash flow positive property investing.
Welcome back to the HMO Property Show. This week on the podcast, we are talking all things building classification with Mr. John Greenwood from WA-BCA. John, welcome to the podcast.
Glad to be here.
We've just had a huge conversation before we even hit record, and we're going to put a disclaimer at the start of this podcast to say that anything that myself and John discuss is general in nature, and before you... And you'll probably understand why as this podcast unfolds, but before you lodge anything or before you get too far ahead with your plans, always good to engage a building surveyor so you can get some feedback from them on where it's at. So, John, what is a building surveyor?
Well, a building surveyor, it's the commonly known these days as building certifiers, are professionals who assess proposals in the form of building drawings, engineering, details and specifications for compliance with the NCC. The NCC being the National Construction Code and the Building Code of Australia. And once compliance is achieved with the current building standards, including the Building Act, building regulations, then we can issue design certificates and present them to the local government authority for a building permit.
Perfect, nice and easy.
Well, easier said than done.
You make it sound easy. We can lodge plans direct to council for certification as well, can't we?
Yes, correct. And then the council will have their own building surveyors, building certifiers within the council, and they will carry out the same tasks.
What's the benefit of using a private building surveyor compared to the council one?
The private building industry are operating in a competitive market, and therefore they provide... not always, but in most cases, they provide a quicker service, and the fees are not regulated, so it could actually be cheaper and possibly provide more detailed service depending on the application.
Faster as well.
Yeah, definitely faster.
Yeah. What's the general time for the council to approve some plans non-certified?
I think the council, I'll have to check the building regulations again. I think they have 21 days, and when it's certified, they have 10 business days to process the certified application.
Yeah, so much faster.
Yes.
Much faster. How did you get into building surveying, John? Because you're a pond man, you as well. You've got a very sneaky little English accent in the background there.
Yeah, I was very, very fortunate. In the UK, after leaving school, I received a kind of a scholarship to the local government authority in the technical side of the traineeships, and I managed to get into building surveying because my older brothers were in the building industry, and I thought it'd be great to get into the same type of work but be in the office and be more academic than actually hands-on.
So how long have you been in this beautiful country for?
33 years now.
33 years.
Yeah.
And did you just get straight into building surveying when you came over?
Pretty much so. I did a few months with the new swimming pool legislation, which was interesting.
For the fencing?
Yes, correct. I was just coming in just as I arrived. And then I did the building surveying with the local government authority for 4 years. And then I did some lecturing at Curtin University.
Yeah, right.
So that
bit of a change.
Well, it's my dad was a teacher, and I enjoyed seeing what he did, and it's something I always aspired to. And it was great giving back to the industry.
Yeah. Any young up and coming building surveyors that you see out there now that you taught in TAFE?
Yes, funny enough, because it was such a long time ago, I started teaching, would have been 25 years ago, and a lot of those students now are actually managing directors and very senior positions in a lot of the project management companies. Beautiful. Which is great to see. Yeah,
definitely warms the heart, mate, doesn't it? Yeah. How and why did you set up WA-BCA then? Where you went from lecturing to setting up your own business?
Well, the WA Building Act had been in the pipeline for many years. I think we're about 15 years behind Victoria, for example. And but it was always on the cards, and I've been following it. I used to be on the executive committee of the AIBS. I was always informed. We had many workshops over the years, and it was something that I thought would benefit the industry by having a private industry for building surveying. And it just happened that after 17 and a half years of lecturing, I was kind of finished in that. I just wanted to change. And within 6 months of making that decision, the Building Act was enacted in WA, which allowed for private companies to be set up, and the timing was perfect. So I just took it.
And your company's called WABCA, which
Correct.
BCA is the Building Code of Australia?
Building certifiers and assessors.
Ah, right. Because I was going to ask what's the difference between the BCA and the NCC?
Well, the BCA is part of the NCC.
Yeah.
So the NCC is a combination of a number of documents.
Right. There you go. Glad I asked that one. So what's the different classifications of building? Let's keep it kind of residential, because there's a lot out there, isn't there?
Yeah.
And we primarily deal in the residential space. So what are the different classifications, and what's the differences between them?
So you've got Class 1A, which is your normal residential dwelling, which you and I probably live in, single independent detached house. Class 1B, which is more your boarding house, your shared living. You've got Class 2, which are apartments, which you've got one above the other, or partly above the other. Mm-hmm. Class 3 starts to get a little bit more complicated. It involve hotels, involve residential care buildings. And Class 4 could be like a caretaker's home in a larger building.
Cool. So today I'd like to talk about SDA, because it's a bit of a hot topic at the minute, and also HMO as well. Mm-hmm. Just to talk about the different classifications. And I know, like I said at the start there, there's a bit of a disclaimer in here, because what you say is changing on a daily basis. You had a phone call this morning which something happened and then changed on the way to this podcast. So
that's correct.
Yeah.
Yes. So when we certify, and I'm talking as a certifier, not an SDA assessor now. Yeah. So when a private certifier issues a certificate of design compliance, this then submitted to the council. Some of the councils are receiving these applications and disagreeing with the building classifications. Instead of a 1A or a 1B, they're actually classifying it as a Class 3 residential care building. And the particular call I had this morning where the council had changed their mind from a 1A and insisted on a 1B, and now we are actually insisting on a Class 3. So, which is significant with respect to the conditions of building.
So what's the difference between a building surveyor and an SDA assessor?
So a building surveyor is, as I explained earlier, is how we demonstrate compliance with the current building standards. Mm-hmm. An SDA assessor is a registered building professional who has qualified to carry out assessments for the special disability, not the guidelines, the regulations.
So you need to be registered with the NDIS as a SDA provider?
Well, yes, with the Livable Housing Authority.
Yeah, right, okay. So a lot of training to get to where you are, and then a lot of ongoing training, and then they still move the goalposts around anyway.
Well, it's not. It's some of it. A lot of it comes down to a difference of opinion, and without appropriate guidelines from the authorities, like the ABCB, which is the Australian Building Codes Board, we are exercising our own opinion based on the application in front of us. So each application could be different. So the SDA standards have 4 categories: improved livability, robust, fully accessible, and high physical support. Now, each of those categories will potentially change the building classification under the NCC.
Under the NCC, but does the NDIS also state what building classification they want for the different categories? So
the NDIS have provided a guide as to what housing type it is for funding under the SDA. And then they provide also some suggestions of what those NCC categories may be. Mm-hmm. But they are only suggestions, and there's a variety there. So it's really down to the certifier. Every time we approach the NDIS, they always say it's down to the certifier.
We'll wash our hands of that one.
Well, I suppose it is an event. It's really up to the application, and how the certifier sees it.
So it's down to the certifier who privately certifies it, lodges it with the Shire, and the Shire says we don't want that, we want this instead.
That's what's happening at the moment.
That's what's happening at the minute. Wow. How do you navigate that on a daily basis?
It's difficult because over the last 12 months it's changed significantly.
Yeah.
We've gone from one to the other, back to the other, and it's difficult to actually advise the client. Now, as an SDA assessor, I'm not allowed to get involved in building classifications, so I just carry out the SDA assessment.
Yeah.
It's up to the certifier then to determine what classification of building that is, and given that there's probably 20 or 30 certifiers out there that are signing these off. They've all got their different opinions on this, so I have to leave them to it because I'm not allowed to influence them.
Because you're the assessor.
I'm the SDA assessor, yeah.
Yeah, right. And the assessor goes to the finished product to sign off to say it's been built to the
Correct.
NDIS standard?
Yes, so once the building is complete, we have to visit the site and check all items comply with the current building standards, the SDA standards and the approved plans.
Interesting. So you've seen quite a bit of finished product so far then?
Not as much as you'd think.
Yeah.
You're probably well aware the building industry in WA has gone through a difficult time with respect to building materials, tradespeople, and that's delayed a lot of the projects. So a lot of them are still under construction.
Yeah.
We have seen a couple of completed buildings, but most of them are still under construction.
Is there any common, not mistakes, but any common lessons that are being learnt from the finished SDA products that you're seeing as an assessor?
There are a number of issues that a typical homeowner will build as a Class 1A without due regard to the SDA standards, and it's up to the building supervisor to ensure that these standards are met on site. Typical measurements, like, for example, the light switches must align with the door handles when passing through, so that they're on the same level.
Yep.
And that's a typical error that we come across a lot, where they're not.
Door handles at 1 metre, light switch at 1200 or something.
Well, they still have to be between 900 and 1100.
Right,
but you can have one at 900 and one at 1100,
Right.
Which is wrong. It's got to be aligned.
It's got to be the same.
That's a common mistake, you know.
What are the ones that you're seeing at the minute? Any other ones that are sticking out?
What, non-conformances?
Yeah.
There's circulation spaces and door widths. Door widths is a difficult one. Again, residential builders will specify the size of the door. SDA assessors look at the size of the door opening. Now, if you put a door into a door opening, the clear width is not as the door dimensions are.
Because it's got the door jambs.
Correct, the door jambs and the door itself.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, there's no real tolerances available to SDA assessors. So if it's not the required distance, we can't sign it off, and then it needs to be modified.
And with the door jambs on the front door, for instance, you're talking 15, 20 mil either side, and so 40 mil out and it's non-conformance.
Correct.
Right. And what's the options there? Rip the door out, make it bigger.
Well, that is an option. Fortunately, one of the two only performance solutions you can apply in the SDA standards, one of them is automating the door on the latch side. So if you can actually put a powered operated mechanism on, then you don't need that circulation space for that aspect. The actual door width is not able to be performance solution. It has to be, if it's 955 physical support, it has to be 950 or more. So the recommendation we have to any SDA designers out there is don't design to the absolute minimums. Lay yourself some tolerances.
Go above and beyond.
Yes, instead of 950 clear opening, make it 980.
Yeah. The minimum standard that's out there as well, it's just the minimum standard, and there is a lot of people building to that standard. What's the difference that you're seeing between the minimum standard and a product that's above and beyond in the way of livability for the people that live there?
Some of the dwellings that I have seen completed are absolutely beautiful. The wide open corridors, big rooms, lots of high ceilings, really nice homes to live in. Not just for people with a disability, but for any normal person. So if you can go beyond the minimum where it's allowed, quite often you'll be restricted to a range. But if you can go beyond the minimum, you've got the room to do it. I highly recommend you do that.
Yeah. One of the non-conformist things that's popped up, I've got a friend who's like days away from finishing one of his HPS SDAs north of the river. I think you might be involved in it actually. And what they did is when they put the shower spud on the wall in the bathroom, they did it without considering the screed and the tile depth. So the shower spud was out by 25 mil, something like that. But the weird thing is that shower spud has a telescopic handle that you can actually take the shower off and move it up and down and move it around.
That's right. Yes, yes, and that's a typical example.
Yeah.
Again, residential builders got to be aware that the 700 millimeters off the finished floor tile is what we'll be checking, not off the concrete.
Yeah. Interesting. So the different building classification, we've got 1A, 1B and class 3. That's kind of where we're sitting in the SDA space. Yeah. What's the difference?
Sorry, we do have a class 2 residential as well, the apartments.
Yes, we do, yeah.
That's possible, depending on the SDA category.
Yeah. For the purpose of this, because we could get super technical, we'll keep it at their single dwellings at the minute.
Okay.
Class 1, class 1B and class 3. So what's the difference in building the property, or what's the difference in the specification between a class 1A and a class 1B?
Well, when you go to class 1B, you need to provide additional fire protection measures, emergency lighting, interconnected smoke alarms, which under the SDA regulations anyway, you need that anyhow. Yeah. You need to provide other disability functions like car parking and things like backrests to toilets and shower seats. Now, we can remove those requirements through the use of a performance solution for the NCC compliance. Zero lot entry to a building, for example, where you're eliminating the step down, it's a performance solution for CDC compliance.
And what's a performance solution for the people that are listening to the podcast?
So a performance solution is an alternative method of complying with the NCC and the BCA. It's not a mechanism to make a wrong a right. It's just demonstrating another way to achieve compliance. So sometimes you provide additional other protections rather than just removing the step down to the entry to the property. You'll put an extra grate in there with water that will be dispersed away from the entry door, so that the rainwater doesn't go into the property.
Right. Okay. So in class 1B we've got smoke alarms, lighting, and universal access.
Yes.
But we don't have universal access in class 1A.
Correct.
Right. And then what's the difference between 1B and class 3?
So when you go to class 3, you're another step up. In fact, you're using a different building code of Australia, or you're using a commercial assessment, which involves fire protection of openings and boundaries. You're looking at fire sprinklers and a whole measure of building compliance, which is naturally more expensive.
And how many people can live in a class 3 building? Is there a limit?
Well, the class 3 building, it can be, a residential care building. It could be almost like a hospital, It could be enormous,
Yeah. Class 1B, is there a limit on class 1B?
The class 1B, it depends on the application. So when you're looking at, say, the SDA guidelines, when you've got more than 3 participants in there, so you get 4 or more, you're looking at a grouped home, which is not specified in the NCC, but when you're getting more than 3 participants, then you're looking at probably a class 3 building under the NCC classification. Again, it's up to the certifier, but very difficult to put a classification on a hypothetical without seeing the nature of the SDA category and the participants.
Right. So the category of the participant could drive the classification of the building.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the different classifications of the participant, and then talk about the building. So who would live in a class 1A?
Well, class 1A building would be a normal residential building. So you could have, in theory, an improved livability SDA category, or even a robust, where there's some minor modifications to the dwelling to comply with the SDA standards. There's no requirement for circulation spaces because they're not wheelchair-bound people. And so that's an easy 1A assessment.
Yep. Class 1B?
1B, we tend to start looking at boarding houses and that type of thing there. So you're looking at upgraded smoke alarms, disability access anyway.
Yep.
So again, that could be fully accessible, for example, as long as it meets the SDA standards.
Right. And then HPS?
The high physical support is the bone of contention. The BCA clearly states, and I understand how building surveyors interpret it, that if you're in need of assistance of exiting the building in the event of an emergency, then it should be a Class 3 residential. So that's the difficulty in distinguishing between the NCC interpretation and the SDA, where I understand the SDA intent is to have residential homes that are modified for the participants. Again, it comes down to the actual participant themselves, because even under the HPS you can be mobile in a wheelchair and self-sufficient, or you may need 24-hour care. It's all down to that participant.
Yep. Could we build a Class 1A to HPS standard and have HPS participants in there as certified as Class 1A?
Yes,
Yep.
yes, that's been done.
Yep.
And been certified that way, and it still is by some certifiers, although it is frowned upon by some of the councils, as we discussed earlier.
Yeah. So we've seen some councils, and we won't mention them in particular, but Class 1A went in. They wanted it as Class 3. Did they want it as Class 3 because it was to HPS?
Correct, yes.
Right, so if it was only built to IL standard, they
Yes.
would have accepted the 1A.
I would have thought so, yeah.
Right.
There's no reason not to.
Yeah, okay, interesting, right. So many questions. So participant-led. Right, and then you said something earlier about 4 bedrooms then becomes
Grouped home.
grouped home. So if we had 4 bedrooms for IL, what would that fall under?
It's still a grouped home.
Still a grouped home.
And it becomes very difficult to classify it anything other than a Class 3 under the NCC.
Right. So a 2-bedroom HPS should be Class 3.
And that's not to say, sorry to interrupt,
Yeah,
that's not to say that a grouped home IL could be considered a 1B. Again, down to the certifier.
Yeah. Right. So there's no real clear-cut answer.
No.
It really depends on who the certifier is. And as the assessor, when you go out to assess these properties when they're complete, do you look at the building classification, or do you just look to see that it meets the standards?
Just the standards, the
Right.
SDA standards.
Okay.
The buildings, I have to take my certifier's hat off when I do that. I'm not involved in that at all.
Yeah, okay.
So no, I don't. I just check for the SDA standards compliance.
Yeah. And have any build permits been approved as a certain classification and then been changed that you're aware of?
Not after the building permit has been issued.
Right.
That's a legal document to give the authority to build under those approved plans.
Right. But they have been certified as, say, a Class 1A and then lodged with council, and council has said, we're not accepting this unless it's a 1B or a 3.
Correct.
Right, okay. Hope you're keeping up with this one, everybody. It's a lot of numbers being thrown around. One of the big things as well, John, is fire sprinklers. A bit of a hot topic at the minute. Do we need them? Do we not need them? Because it's a Class 3 requirement, is that correct?
Correct, yeah.
Yeah.
Class 3 residential care
Yeah.
requirement.
So if we're building to IL or FA, for instance, do we need to put fire sprinklers in under the NDIS guideline?
You don't have to put fire sprinklers under the NDIS guideline under any circumstances. Fire sprinklers are a requirement of the building code at the NCC.
Right.
So, which comes to the Class 3 residential care category.
Yeah.
The sprinklers are a proven method for extinguishing localised fires in buildings. Very rarely do we lose a building when it's properly sprinkled and functioning correctly.
Yeah.
So it is a very good method of protecting life in the event of a fire.
Now, the problem that I see with the fire sprinklers is it's a residential house. Let's say we've got a 2-bed HPS with an on-site carer. Carer goes to make some toast, for instance. Something happens in one of the bedrooms. Carer goes into the bedroom. Toast triggers the smoke alarm. Does that trigger the fire sprinklers?
Not necessarily. So
Right.
the sprinklers have to be designed in accordance with the appropriate standards. And more likely they'll be using a heat sensor rather than a smoke sensor.
Right.
So only when they reaches a certain temperature will the extinguishing mechanism be employed, and that would be localized. So if it's in one bedroom, for example, if there's a waste paper bin fire in one of the participant bedrooms, then the heat from that will set off the sprinkler system, which will then localize to that room rather than go off in the whole house. Otherwise, the participants in that property will have nowhere to live for the next 6 months while they fix up the water damage.
That's what I was thinking, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, burn the toast and flood the place.
Yeah.
So with the fire sprinkler systems, they would have heat detectors throughout the property instead of smoke detectors.
That's right.
Right, okay. Interesting. I think this next question is a bit of an open-ended question, but is there any other changes coming through that we need to be aware of?
Well, we are due the new set of SDA standards. They're supposed to be reviewed every 3 years, and the ones we're using now are 3 years and more. We've had some clarification points over those years. We've had 4 updates to the assessors to clarify some of the questions. I believe there's no more clarification releases until the new standards come out, and I really do sincerely hope that a lot of these issues are addressed in the new standards.
Would someone like yourself be involved in the, giving feedback for these?
Not really.
No.
It's all done over Eastern
Yeah.
high levels.
Do anybody do the West people ever get involved in anything that's going on in the East, or do they just set the rules and then we have to follow?
My experience is mostly they set the rules and we follow. However, there are very active people in the community, the SDA community, who there's a Facebook page and there's a lot of feedback comes through that. There are representatives from WA on the various committees. I hope that they are listening to what we have to say over here, because it is slightly different, the way we build.
It is. Double brick for starters. There's a bit of timber going around though nowadays, isn't there? A bit of timber, steel frame, a lot more construction methodologies changing,
Correct.
which is a good thing. Do you mind if we talk about shared accommodation and HMOs, not the disability stuff?
Sure.
Because you actually said that you used to have a property in Kensington, didn't you, that you used to rent out room by room?
Yeah, look, I think anybody who lives near a university and has surplus rooms can provide a shared accommodation for either a student or a backpacker or anybody who's looking for accommodation without a massive commitment. And it's very common in Perth. I'm sure it's common in other areas as well. And everybody knows it goes on, and as long as everybody sticks to the rules and doesn't, I've seen people put backpackers in warehouses without the necessary protection, and that's dangerous. But if you're living in a single residential dwelling, then I think it should be fine.
What are the requirements around shared accommodation that you're aware of, with classification for building up to 6 people, and any sort of safety measures that we need to put in place?
Well, there's a lot of councils still would prefer a Class 1A residential application for the Certificate of Design Compliance.
Yep.
For that purpose. It's simply a house, and it has additional bedrooms, and it's just being used as a house. The fact that they've got unrelated people in there could potentially change that to a Class 1B, again, depending on the circumstances, depending on the application, and depending on the council, and depending on the certifier.
Again,
politically correct answer there.
So if because all the properties we've done so far, we've done 5 bedroom, 5 bathroom, or 6 bedroom, 6 bathroom. We've done the 1B upgrade to the property, but obviously due to cost of conversion to add universal access into an established property, we've never done that. Now, if for any reason the council did decide to come back to us and say, right, moving forward, these need to be Class 1B, could they make us go back and change the old properties, or could they just enforce it on the new ones moving forward?
Again, very difficult question to answer. A lot of it comes down to your planning approval. So what is that town planning scheme allotting to that allotment, and are you entitled to have a Class 1B in that a residential area? Does it need a planning application? Does it need to be advertised and consult with the neighbours? Do we need 6 cars outside that, does everybody drive? All these things need to be considered by the local government authority. And that when the planners get involved, it's a whole different ballgame.
Yeah, that's true. I was thinking if they try to enforce Class 1B on 6 or less, but Class 1B is a residential building, which is 7 people or more, which is lodging and boarding house, like you said there as well, isn't it? What about a performance solution? If we did like a 8-bedroom HMO, for instance, a Class 1B, would you need universal access, or would it be a performance solution around not putting universal access in if it was for shared accommodation?
Well, the 1B requirement does call up the universal access. Now, there is potential under the performance provisions of the BCA to remove some of them if it's appropriate. Again, the performance solutions are there only if there's an alternative method of compliance. It's not there just to remove something because you don't like it. It's got to be a good reason for it and a method of compensating for that.
Yeah, okay. So as long as we stick to Class 1As, we don't need universal access.
As long as it's acceptable to the council. So if the planners get involved in saying that you're using this building for something that other than it should be, and that they consider it a different classification of building, then they could ask you then to put a planning application in, or take enforcement action for you using a building that you're not authorised to do so.
Right, excellent. Good stuff. Is there a team in place at the company that could
we have a good team, we have a good staff. A lot of consultants that operate with us, and it's a good unit. Yeah.
I was looking on the website earlier as well, and something caught my eye. You do bushfire attack levels as well.
Mm-hmm.
We've had a few people recently that we've designed certain properties for, and the BAL ratings come back at a certain level. What are the different sort of BAL ratings, and how do they affect construction costs? Because some of the clients that we've worked with have seen that this BAL rating's been high, which has forced the construction price over what we originally estimated.
Yeah, so the BAL assessments, so what we do is we carry out the risk assessment. So we inspect the property and classify the vegetation around that and assign a BAL rating. It could be 12.5, it could be 19, and it could be 29, 40, or even flame zone, which is FZ. So each of those presents its own problems. The higher you go, the more expensive it's going to be. I don't know the construction costs exactly because it's not what we do, and each builder is different. Yeah,
you just certify it.
Yes, a lot of it comes down to design as well.
Yeah.
I understand, I think it's about $12,000 to $15,000 to go from low to BAL 12.5, which is, that's just the start. If you have to build in a BAL 40 zone, for example, that's very, very expensive. Most councils will try and get you down to 29 through other methods if possible.
What would be the difference in construction methodology between a 12.5 and a 40?
So a 40, you would have to be protecting the windows. Well, just about everything really. Everything gets upgraded.
Becomes a fireproof.
You can't use timbers that are combustible and that type of thing.
It has to be double brick.
Not necessarily double brick, but it has to be fire rated, and certainly roof penetrations and things like that. It's a massive topic in itself.
Yeah.
It's just when it comes to SDA stuff, sometimes there's a conflict. Like for a robust, you need laminated glass, whereas the bushfire want toughened glass. So, which one prevails? And the NCC always does prevail. So now we're looking at toughened laminated glass, which is going to increase the costs even more.
Yeah, okay. Is there any other services that you provide at WABCA that we're not aware of, that we haven't chatted about?
Well, we do all the certificates of design compliance for all construction types, bushfire assessors, and of course disability access. And we have provision to use contractors for any of the other services like engineering and energy efficiency assessments and the like.
Excellent. How do people contact you, John, if they want to get some feedback or some advice, or if they've got some plans that they want to find from you guys?
Well, we have a website, wabca.com.au, and that's the easiest method to contact us, through the details on the website.
Fantastic. John, thank you very much for coming on the podcast, mate. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Cheers. Hey, it's Neil here, and on October the 19th to the 22nd, I'm racing in the Cape to Cape mountain bike ride to help raise money for my sister's care home. Now, if you're getting value from the HMO Property Show and all of the other content that we put out there, I would really appreciate a donation to show your appreciation. So I will leave that with you guys. The link is in the show notes, and I hope you continue to get value and listen to the HMO Property Show. Peace.
Thanks for listening. Make sure you tune in the same time next week so you stay up to date with all the cash flow positive property updates.